It was Friday, the end of the work week. Paul leaned back in his chair and made his usual entries in his journal. He wrote down what he had accomplished and what still needed his attention. He had started this habit years ago, a daily routine that kept him grounded. Sometimes, the day didn't go as planned, despite his efforts. But even on those days, writing down the lack of progress gave him a strange sense of motivation. It pushed him to aim for better days ahead. There was something satisfying about reflecting on his effort, good or bad, and taking time to recognize his progress. No matter what kind of day it had been, he always listed the next steps for tomorrow. That way, the knowledge he'd gathered during the day wouldn't go to waste. This simple habit always gave him fresh momentum. The next morning, Jerry walked into his office late and said, "Paul, a few of us are meeting for some drinks and food. Come with us." Paul was about to decline, but then paused. Why not, he thought. There's nothing waiting for me at home, just indifference. The past month had been tough, and if Paul was being honest, the last 6 months hadn't been easy at all. His wife, Barbara, had been growing more distant. What had started as small distractions had slowly turned into subtle acts of disrespect. In recent weeks, even her tone had grown cold and dismissive. When Paul first brought it up, she apologized. But lately, her reactions just frustrated him more. She had begun to treat him like a child. The respect in their home seemed to have vanished. Saying Paul was unhappy would be a huge understatement. Still, Paul hoped it was just a phase. He called his wife to let her know he'd be home late. Her response gave him little comfort. "I don't care. I'll be working for hours anyway. Eat out, or there's frozen food in the freezer." Then she hung up before he could say another word. He muttered to himself and went to the meeting. What started as a quick drink with colleagues turned into dinner with friends. One by one, people said their goodbyes, and Paul was left sitting alone. He thought about going home too, but he didn't really feel like it. Always one to keep busy, he pulled a few crumpled sheets of paper from his jacket pocket and started taking notes. Now on his second beer of the night, he was programming a microprocessor. The code needed to be compact and efficient, Paul's specialty. He often compared his work to trying to pour a liter of beer into a pint glass without spilling a drop. He was lost in the details when a gentle voice behind him said, "Paul, may I sit next to you?" He looked up and instantly recognized the voice. It was Jenny. Paul smiled. They had worked together for over a year. Jenny was sharp, kind, and had a gentle heart. There was something about her, an air of warmth, a quiet vulnerability, that he truly admired. When she entered a room, it felt just a bit brighter. And right now, she was exactly the kind of presence he needed. "I thought you'd already left," he said. "I went to the restroom and then saw you sitting here alone." Paul gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, I'd welcome the company." But Jenny didn't sit across from him. She sat next to him, met his gaze, and leaned in slightly to glance at his notes. "What are you working on?" she asked. Paul grinned, a little embarrassed. "Just a few code snippets for the processor. We're trying to get too much done at once." Jenny smiled. She knew Paul's skills. If anyone could pull it off, it was him. Paul chuckled softly. Compliments had become rare for him lately. "We just have to believe it's possible. Management needs to understand we're tackling the impossible. It just takes a bit more time." They spent the next hour talking about work, exchanging a few honest but respectful criticisms about the higher-ups, whom they still deeply admired. Then, with a gentle shift, Jenny steered the conversation toward their personal lives. She shared stories about her parents' and older brother's weddings. And without being too direct, she gently nudged Paul to open up about himself. The truth was, Jenny understood more than she let on. When the clock passed 8, Paul slowly sipped the last of his tonic with lime. He had switched from beer earlier to avoid drinking too much. Jenny noticed, and sensed that the right moment had come. She wasn't someone with much experience when it came to matters of the heart. And being honest with herself, it was difficult. Paul was a married man. But she was determined. "How about we head over to the ballroom and have a dance?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Paul's reaction was awkward, his expression uncertain and slightly uncomfortable. Jenny quickly added, Maybe afterward you could walk me home." That question, simple as it was the boldest thing Jenny had ever dared to say. a quiet and reserved woman by nature. She suddenly felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap or step back. Paul hesitated. I really should be heading home," he said. "Barbara's probably already making dinner." But that wasn't true, and they both knew it. Barbara hadn't shown any interest in him or his meals for weeks. Still, as a husband, Paul felt like he was stepping into dangerous territory. Jenny tilted her head slightly and whispered, "I just thought, maybe after what Barbara told me, you might want to spend some time with me." Her words hit Paul like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, after what Barbara told you?" Jenny's eyes showed a mix of sadness and discomfort. "I ran into her last Tuesday. She was out with some friends and a man I didn't recognize. It caught my attention because, well, her behavior didn't seem like that of a typical wife. She noticed me watching and came over," Jenny continued. "And she said something about you two having an agreement, that you were in an open marriage." Paul stared at her, stunned. What exactly did she do that didn't seem like typical wife behavior? Jenny's discomfort grew. She had already pushed herself far by asking a married man to stay with her, and now she was revealing something that clearly blindsided him. "I'm sorry," she said, rising to leave. "I shouldn't have brought it up." But Paul reached out and gently stopped her. "Please stay." He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "Jenny, if I was in an open marriage, no one ever told me. Barbara and I talked about fidelity very clearly. Any form of infidelity was completely off the table." He paused, then added with quiet pain in his voice, "The last 6 months at home have been far from ideal. I've been trying to figure out what went wrong. And now I think, maybe you just revealed a key piece of the puzzle. My wife, has she been having an affair?" The weight of that question now shifted onto Jenny's shoulders. Paul was searching for clarity, but all Jenny had were observations. And she didn't want to destroy a marriage based on guesses. Still, the way Barbara had danced, the affection, the kisses, none of it left much room for doubt. "I can't say for certain," Jenny replied carefully. "But if my husband behaved like that, he wouldn't be my husband anymore." Paul sat in silence, his thoughts spiraling. This new revelation cast the last few months in a different light. Barbara, was she truly involved with someone else? Was that why she had grown so cold, so distant? It all made too much sense. Suddenly, Paul slammed his hand on the table. The loud bang cut through the room. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward him. Jenny flinched. Her eyes were full of tears. "Oh no, not you," Paul burst out. He realized what had just happened, how his emotions had taken over, and how everyone in the room was now staring at him. He stood up, speaking clearly so everyone could hear. "Sorry, everyone. My friend here just told me something very disturbing." He turned back to Jenny, who was frozen in place. Her eyes wide, tears rolling down her cheeks. "She's a wonderful woman," Paul said firmly. "A dear friend. I didn't mean to upset her. I would never do that to her. You understand that, Jenny? I would never describe you like that." Jenny nodded, tears streaming silently. She wasn't just mourning a moment or a missed chance. She was grieving for her friend and for the pain she had just unknowingly uncovered. Paul sat in silence, overwhelmed. Jenny gently took his hand. "You know I'd never try to hurt you," she said softly. "You're a kind, wonderful man, and I'm truly glad to call you a friend." Jenny smiled through her tears and hugged him tightly. As she wiped her face, she asked, "What will you do now?" Paul sighed. He had never imagined going through something like this. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I should talk to her. But would she even tell me the truth?" Jenny slowly shook her head. Anyone who cheats is also capable of lying, she thought. Maybe hiring a private investigator would give him clarity, but how much would that even cost? The idea weighed heavily on him. My God, he thought, did she really bring another man into our home? He wasn't sure anymore if he was thinking clearly or if his emotions had taken over. He tried to calm down, focused on his breathing, and asked himself if there might be another explanation. They sat together for a while, talking things through, trying to make sense of it all. But no clear decision was made. Eventually, it was time to go, and they left the place together. "Paul, I'm ashamed of what I said earlier," Jenny said quietly. Paul looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" He honestly couldn't recall anything she had said that could have been offensive. Her voice was low, carrying a deep sense of shame. I invited you to come to my place. I've never done something like that before, not with a married man. It just happened. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Paul pulled her into a hug and whispered, "That's the nicest compliment I've ever received, and the most tempting one." Then he stepped back and looked into her eyes. "If Barbara really is cheating on me, I'll file for divorce. I won't stay with someone who betrays me." He gave her a bittersweet smile. "If I end up alone, you better be ready, because I'll come for you. You're, without a doubt, the most wonderful woman I've ever met. You're smart, funny, and have a beautiful heart." He paused. "It's just a shame we didn't meet under different circumstances." It was a brave confession, but deep inside, he knew there was truth in Jenny's words. He had always felt the invisible weight of his marriage holding him back. He gently kissed her forehead, gave her one last sad look, the kind you give to someone who cares more about you than your own spouse, and walked to his car. Paul sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, thinking about everything he had just learned. Suddenly, all the pieces seemed to fall into place. Barbara's constant absence, her distant behavior, and now this final, painful revelation. It was all grotesquely clear. Would he confront her, spy on her, or ask her directly? He longed for certainty. At that moment, doubt was just as heavy as the betrayal itself. As he drove home, he barely paid attention to the road. His mind was locked on Barbara and the state of their marriage. Was he sure she had cheated? A part of him still didn't want to believe it. No husband wants to accept such a thing. But how could he uncover the truth? And once he knew, what then? When he arrived home, he still had no answers. Lost in thought, he left the car parked right out front and walked through the back entrance, wanting to avoid Barbara altogether. He needed time to think. If she kept behaving like she had been these past few weeks, avoiding her wouldn't be hard. But she didn't give him that time. "Paul, could you please come into the living room?" her voice called out. He took a deep breath and walked through the archway. And there she was, his wife, sitting on the sofa, holding hands with a man Paul had never seen before. The man wore a smug grin. "Paul, we need to talk," Barbara said calmly. In that moment, everything clicked. Paul saw her clearly. He understood her lack of remorse. He understood her motivations. And for the first time, he was absolutely certain about what he needed to do. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His posture changed. His back straightened. His presence grew stronger. "Hello, darling," he said with a sharp edge in his voice. "So, I guess we are in an open marriage now." Imagine my surprise. There was no doubt about what came next. Paul handled the divorce that followed in a way he never thought himself capable of. He saw Barbara now through different eyes. Eyes that no longer viewed her with love or admiration, but with cold, harsh clarity. Barbara was stunned by how quickly and effortlessly Paul cut all ties with her. She had always clung to the fantasy that it was possible to love two men at once. But now that illusion was shattered, leaving a deep and lasting mark on her life. The divorce itself was surprisingly simple. They had no children. There wasn't much to divide, just a modest house where their shared life had begun. Barbara took what she wanted, and they split their small savings. And just like that, their marriage was over. Paul spent that terrible night in silence. His world had collapsed. Yet, in a strange way, he had also found something new: his freedom. 6 months later, not long after the divorce was finalized, Paul approached Jenny with a warm, genuine smile and asked, "Jenny, would you like to have dinner with me this weekend? Maybe even dance a little?" For years to come, he would remember that smile, a radiant, 1,000-watt smile that came straight from the heart. Please, don't judge Jenny too harshly. Pursuing married men had never been her way. But she saw a good man, a man she respected, and she simply came to the quiet conclusion that he deserved better. And once Paul was no longer weighed down by a broken marriage, everything between them began to unfold naturally, as if it had always been meant to be.